This video is about the laws and regulations that are supposed to keep employees safe at work. My name is Branigan Robertson and I'm an employment lawyer. Now I'm going to answer the following questions in this video series. What laws protect the safety of workers? What are your rights if your employer is breaking those laws? How should you report an unsafe work condition? Who do you report that to? How much money can you win if you get fired for reporting safety violations? What happens if you get hurt on the job? And how do you get compensated for the time off of work following an injury? Now I'm going to explain the answers to these questions without using a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo or jargon. So if this interests you, keep watching. This video is part 1 in a 4-part series called Workplace Safety for Employees. In this first video, I will detail your rights to a safe working environment and the laws that are there to protect you. The next video is about how to properly report an unsafe work environment. The third video is all about what to do if you get retaliated against for reporting an unsafe workplace. And the final video is what you should do if you get hurt on the job. Now I strongly recommend that you don't skip ahead. Watch all 4 of these videos in order. The foundation that I explain in this video is key to understanding the second, third, and fourth video. And since safety-related cases can be very valuable, it is truly unfortunate when I can't help a worthy client because they didn't know the basic information regarding their rights. But before we get our hands dirty with the whiteboard, I need to say 2 quick things. Number 1, I have a license to practice law in California, but I'm making this video for workers all across America. This video covers the basics, but this video should not be taken as legal advice for your situation. The workplace safety rules can differ from state to state, and more importantly, I don't know you or anything about your situation. You should never take what is said on a YouTube video as legal advice. If you need legal advice, you need to pick up the phone and call a lawyer in your state. Number 2, if you are in California, please don't call me looking for answers to basic legal questions. The free consultation process at my office is primarily for Californians who got fired and they believe they have a case for wrongful termination, retaliation, discrimination, or something serious like that. The consultation process is not for giving out free legal advice. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into it. I forgot, one last thing before we get started. My guess is that if you're watching this video, you've experienced a safety issue at work. Could you please take a second and tell us about your issue in the comment section down below? The more people that share their experiences, the more others will learn from those experiences and see issues in their own workplaces and put pressure on their employers to fix them. Together we rise, separate we fall. Let's talk big picture for a minute. Back in the day, there were no safety standards for American workplaces, which led to thousands of unnecessary injuries and deaths. Some ruthless employers drove their employees hard in the quest for profit. And if an employee got hurt or killed, the company didn't care. They would just replace them with another worker and carry on with business as usual. After plenty of debate, our federal and state governments started regulating safety at work. They have passed thousands of laws and regulations that companies must comply with. And if they don't, companies are penalized by fines, lawsuits, criminal penalties, and civil damages. This video summarizes common employer obligations under these laws. So let's get to it. It's about time that we talk about OSHA. In 1970, the federal government passed the Occupational Safety Health Act, OSHA. OSHA set forth the basic safety regulations that apply to all employees nationwide. Some states, like California, where I practice law, implemented what's called Cal-OSHA, which is found in the Labor Code, Section 6300. Cal-OSHA adds additional safety regulations to the federal regulations. All of these laws are meant to promote healthy and safe working conditions for individuals in the country. With some exceptions, OSHA laws and regulations apply to all employees, whether you work for a small, private little company, a huge publicly traded company, or a local city government, or even the federal government. These laws apply to almost everyone. The first part of OSHA and Cal-OSHA, the first regulations that you should really know about, are called the general duties. These are the general legal requirements, the bare minimum that every workplace, regardless of industry, regardless of task, must comply with. Under OSHA, number 1, every employer is legally required to provide its employees a workplace free of recognized hazards that are causing or are likely to cause death or serious physical harm to its employees. And number 2, the employer is legally obligated to comply with OSHA safety standards put out by the Secretary of Labor. And all that can be found in 29 U.S.C. 654 subsection A. Cal-OSHA's general duties are similar but better. Number 1, every employer is obligated to furnish safe and healthful employment to its employees. Number 2, employers must do everything that is reasonably necessary to protect the life, safety, and health of employees. Number 3, employers shall furnish and use safety devices, safeguards, and shall adopt and use practices, methods, and processes which are reasonably adequate to render such employment and place of employment safe. And finally, employers are not allowed to require an employee to go to an unsafe workplace or a place of unsafe work. And all that can be found in the California Labor Code, section 6400 through 6404. If you're paying attention, you can see that California's general duties are broader and not only limited to recognized hazards that could lead to serious physical harm or death. Not only does California's law apply to more situations, but it creates an affirmative default obligation to do everything that is reasonably necessary to protect its employees. Okay, so that is the general obligations under the employers. So if you see a violation of one of these general duties at your workplace, does that mean that you should run out, get a lawyer, and sue them? No, absolutely not. In fact, you're probably not allowed to sue them in civil court for basic safety violations. But there are definitely times you should take action. And I will give you a detailed roadmap on what to do in this video series. So if you're finding this interesting, keep watching. Before we get to more specific regulations in the rest of this video about safety, I should take a moment and discuss what kinds of injuries these laws seek to prevent. Primarily, these regulations aim to reduce physical injuries and deaths, so physical safety. Except in limited circumstances, OSHA does not attempt to directly regulate psychological safety, like bullying or harassment. With that said, we will talk about psychological safety in this video series, so if that's your primary issue, keep watching. I've also made a bunch of videos about harassment and bullying, if that is interest to you. Also, in addition to safety, OSHA tries to regulate workplace violence. Employees who have experienced acts of violence at work or become aware of threats, intimidation, or other indicators showing that the potential for violence exists should put his or her employer on notice that violence might happen. When notified, companies are supposed to take action to prevent it from happening, and if they don't, there are consequences. The general duties that we outlined earlier are just the starting point. Beyond that, and especially in California, there are many more specific regulations that apply to most industries. For example, personal protective equipment, PPE. Employers have a duty to furnish their employees with any necessary and effective safety devices. This can include things like gloves, safety glasses, helmets, belts, outerwear for bad weather, respirators, protective footwear, face guards, etc. And in California, PPE must be provided at the employer's expense. Beyond that, employers must ensure that each employee is instructed with and uses the PPE in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Next, HAZCOM, Hazardous Substances Disclosure. The HAZCOM standard generally requires employers to inform their employees, to warn them of the hazardous chemicals to which the employees may be exposed to in the workplace. Next, disaster planning. Employers must have an alarm system to alert employees of emergencies. They must also have a disaster plan, especially those companies who handle hazardous or flammable or explosive materials. An emergency plan must be in writing, and it must include emergency escape plans, procedures to account for all employees, procedures for employees who have to remain to operate critical equipment or plant operations, and it has to include a whole lot more than that. Next, ergonomics or repetitive motion injuries like carpal tunnel. Every employer who has had 2 or more employees suffer an RMI in the last year must implement a program to minimize RMIs. Any exposures that cause RMIs must be corrected in a timely manner or minimized to the extent feasible. The employer must consider engineering controls such as workstation redesign, adjustable fixtures, chair replacements or tool redesign, and administrative controls such as job rotation, work pacing, or work breaks. Next, smoking. No California employer shall knowingly or intentionally permit, and no person shall engage in, smoking tobacco products in an enclosed place at any place of employment. But this ban on workplace smoking does not apply to certain places, like hotel or motel rooms, guest rooms, designated smoking areas, tobacco shops, truck cabs, warehouse facilities, etc. Next, heat illness. Employers have a duty to control the risk of heat illness in outdoor places of employment. Heat illness is a really serious medical condition. People call me about this all the time. And it results in the body's inability to cope with a particular heat load. That includes things like heat stroke, cramps, exhaustion. This can include, the employer might be required to provide things like water, shade, and other cooling measures. Training is also a big deal when it comes to heat illness. Finally, record keeping, right? Many OSHA standards require that employers keep records of injuries that happen on the job. While employers don't need to record every little boo-boo or band-aid, they do need to record serious injuries like death, anything that results in the employee being away from work for several days, medical treatment, first aid, loss of consciousness, or any other kind of significant injury or illness. Now, going beyond what we just discussed, OSHA and Cal-OSHA regulate safety by passing specific standards for specific activities and for specific industries. For example, OSHA has specific regulations concerning things like ladders, stairways, sanitation, fire extinguishers, cranes, woodworking machinery, right? Just about every type of toxic substance like lead, arsenic, asbestos, benzene, etc. that you could think of. Textiles, laundry machinery, ventilation, and the list goes on and on. Now, obviously, to keep this video short, I cannot comprehensively analyze the literally thousands of regulations that govern thousands of hazards found in hundreds of different industries, right? The video would be 24 hours long. There are specific requirements for just about every kind of activity or situation that you could think about. But this is not as daunting as you might think. For example, let's say you work as a painter. It might be wise to take 20 to 30 minutes, get on OSHA's website, and familiarize yourself with the regulations on the use of things like ladders, aerosols, and paint disposal. Or if you work in a cabinet shop, it would be wise to check out the regulations on woodworking machinery, PPE, ventilation. Or if you work on a production line in a factory, look up ergonomics, power tool safety, and repetitive motion injuries. I'll put a link in the description below to OSHA web pages that contain the regulations at issue, and I highly recommend that you check these pages out after we finish the video. Now, before we take a quick look at what your rights are if you work in an unsafe environment, I think it's really important to take just a moment and note OSHA's most cited standards. These are the top 10 most common OSHA regulations that employers violate. Right now, employers are getting fined left and right for things like construction fall protection violations, such as people not using safety equipment when on roofs or high buildings under construction. Number 2, respiratory protection violations. Number 3, ladder violations. Number 4, HAZCOM violations, such as not identifying and pointing out the hazards to your employees. Number 5, scaffolding violations. 6, failing to train employees in the construction industry in fall protection. The failure to train employees can be a violation in and of itself. Number 7, electrified equipment lockout, like circuit breakers and power boxes not being disengaged properly when employees are working on them. Number 8, eye and ear protection violations. Number 9, powered industrial truck violations. And number 10, machinery guard and safeguards, right? I'll put a link to the top 10 most cited violations on OSHA's website, so you can see as this changes over time. Hopefully companies will get better at stopping some of these violations. Before we finish out this video, I want to give a brief overview of what your rights are. We are going to dive deep into this in the next video, but I think it's appropriate to tell you the following now. If you are being asked to work in an unsafe environment, you have the following rights. Number 1, you have a right to refuse to do unsafe work. It is illegal for your employer to punish you for refusing to perform hazardous work if both of the following things are true. Number 1, performing the work would violate an OSHA health or safety regulation. That should be obvious, right? This includes the general duties that we talked about earlier. Number 2, the violation would create a real and apparent hazard to you or your coworkers. Number 2, you have the right to report the violation to OSHA. Number 3, you have the right to receive written copies of information about the hazards in your workplace. Now, beyond that, if you are in an unsafe environment, I strongly recommend that you remain calm. Do not overreact. Do not become an aggressor. Unless immediate action is warranted, I recommend that you do your research on the regulations first before you refuse to do any work. I also recommend that you watch the rest of the videos in this series before you complain to your employer or OSHA. If you're gonna submit a complaint, you wanna make sure first that you are right. And if you are wrong, you might inadvertently ruin the relationship with your employer and kick off a chain of events that you cannot control. So keep watching, because we are going to do a good job of covering all the things that you're able to do if you're in an unsafe environment. Okay, we're going to wrap on that note. I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video. We are going to cover your rights more extensively in the next video, which is titled How to Report an Unsafe Work Environment. Stay tuned for that. Also, don't be afraid to take a look at the links below to OSHA and Cal-OSHA's websites for more information. OSHA and Cal-OSHA have an incredible amount of information available for free on their websites, and it's fairly easy to navigate. Also, please remember, I'm a California lawyer. Don't call my office looking for free legal advice or basic answers to legal questions. The free consultation process at my office is for California employees who got fired. It is not for giving out free legal advice to everyone who wants it. I don't have time for that, and part of the reason why I make these videos is to try to help that situation. Now, with all that said, I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit the like button, share this with your coworkers, and have a great day. Take care.